Hydrate.
Yeah, and we are live, guys. So feel free to
Hi,
get
everyone.
started.
Thank you
Hi.
all so much for joining Asian Queens in Animation's panel, Queerness in Animation. We have here today Sabrina, who you might know as a storyboarder and director of Star versus the Forces of Evil, Gravity Falls, and most recently, Owl House. Real quickly, I just want to shout out Asian Queens in Animation and our mission statement, because we here at Asian Queens in Animation want to be a voice and I'm so sorry. We here at Asian Queens and Asian, this is nerve-wracking.
You got this.
We got this. But we here at Asian Queens in Animation seek to empower Asian women and underrepresented gender identities in animation and VFX. And we are so thankful that we get people and voices like Sabrina who can share their story and to share their future, as you know, we all are going to be future creators in animation, whether we are storyboarders, directors, screenwriters. And we're so thankful to have this space to demystify what a lot of people may not know about animation. One of the things that I really want to create in this safe space is creating allyship. So my name is Cesare Barbano. I am a creative PA at Parallax Studios. I am a bisexual Asian American, and my goal is to somehow make my way into the animation screenwriting area. And my pronouns are she, her, hers. And since we are a space for allyship as well as LGBTQIA safety, Sabrina, I will let you introduce your pronouns, your cultural, or how you identify culturally, as well as something really fun to do, what character you most identified with in the works that you've done.
Ooh, okay. I'm Sabrina. Pronouns are they, them. My ethnic background is I'm mixed. I'm half Japanese, half like French Italian ish. Let's see, favorite character that I most identified with. Favorite character, I'm not sure that totally reflects me perfectly, but definitely Queen Eclipsa from Star vs. Forces of Evil.
I do love that. Yes. Most recently for me, I think I resonate with Luce the most, just because of the relationships I have.
Yeah.
Closely resonates. If not Luce, definitely I say with admiration Hootie. Just the sheer I would like to embody as a human being.
Hootie is a very aspirational character.
Who wouldn't want to be a face in a door, right?
Who wouldn't want to be an all-powerful snake owl?
True, it's true. So thank you so much for attending. I know that is my go-to phrase, but I know that being in animation, it's a goal to want to share what we're all doing and to demystify. And I just want to have it be that, you know, AQI really appreciates the voices who do come in and spend their time with us. But we can move on to a more just one-on-one conversation. And I'd love to talk about, you know, what sparked your interest in animation. I know you started in character animation, right? But you've branched out more towards storyboarding and directing and now writing.
Yeah, so I mean, I think like many people, you know, just very drawn to visual storytelling. I think like my backstory is my parents are actually lawyers. And so I feel like, you know, they're very chatty, very opinionated people. And I feel like kind of the only way I could kind of get a word in was to move into the fictional space to express myself. So that's kind of where I think that initial interest came from. Let's see, so I went to CalArts for character animation. I think fairly early on, I was kind of focusing on storyboarding. You know, generally speaking, people either do like boarding or design or animation. And I was always kind of waffling between story and design. I did internships in both spaces. I think initially I didn't feel super like I could do story. It was a very, very male-dominated space at the time. And I think the sensibilities were very kind of traditionally masculine. So it kind of took me a while to kind of get into a space where I felt, you know, like, oh, I can really live here. Honestly, when I interned at Disney Feature back in about 2012, and watching them produce Frozen actually was kind of a space where like, oh, this is a very, very feminine space. This is a space, that really embraces musicals and female-driven stories. And so I feel like that was kind of the first time where like, oh, like, I really feel like I could fit in here. Because that's how I got into that space. And, kind of took a bunch of story tests, trying to break into the story side of things. And I eventually landed my first job at Gravity Falls. So that's how I kind of made that transition.
And what a story too. I mean, Gravity Falls just in general. I would love to talk to you about what you said about storyboarding being very male dominated and how you kind of had to work to break into it. I think a question that I have is, do you think that the space is now changing to be more inclusive, to not be as male dominated?
I definitely think there's been a huge shift in boarding in particular in the last 7 or 8 years. For whatever reason, when I was in school, I feel like the people who were kind of like the star students of story were primarily dudes. And like there was a specific dynamic I remember, or in one of my story classes, before class would start, there was like a group of dudes who were all very nice people, would kind of gather in a little circle and talk about like the, whatever was on TV and was on film. And they're kind of like specific opinions that were kind of like the right ones to have in that space. The reason I mentioned Frozen and musicals is because like 100%, the worst thing you could do was like a musical in that space. Like, ew, like singing, why would anyone want to do that? And so like it felt like kind of my sensibilities really didn't belong there. I did also very much felt that when I was interning at Pixar, I did story internship back in 2010. I really can't speak to what the studio is now. I think they have made more attempts to kind of bring more women into the fold. But when I was there, they had like 2 female story artists out of like 40. So it was definitely, like, again, nothing wrong with the guys there, generally best intentions, but when you have a huge majority of men, there is going to be a certain culture that crops up. So yeah, definitely back then, things are definitely getting better now, but I imagine there's still quite a bit of, imbalance to adjust, especially as you go up the ladder.
Definitely. And I think we see that even in the smaller and especially the larger studios where people are there for a very long time.
Yes, definitely things are way more kind of calcified in the feature studio just because people tend to just hang around there more. Generally speaking, change happens faster in TV just because there's so much turnover.
And so what inspired you to make that specific decision to be in TV and stay in TV versus, I mean, you had gone to Pixar or you had experienced Pixar, which mainly is features or shorts. So what was the flip?
Honestly, it was just like what the job I happened to get was. But honestly, like I really like TV and I haven't really made an effort to switch over to feature. I do kind of prefer the system there, having seen, how things work in feature just from an intern level, which is, a pretty, entry level perspective to have, but still like the overall impression that you get is that feature works a very long time on a single product and they rework that product over and over and over and over and over again. Whereas in TV, the schedules are much shorter, but there's a more sense that, like if you make a board, you're actually going to see those boards in the final product. And to me, I just feel like I learn a lot better and I feel like there are a lot more opportunities in TV because, it's not this smaller thing, people just have, kind of going over and over and over the same things again. The amount of rewriting, I think in feature would definitely drive me a little bit nuts. So for those reasons, I kind of like being in TV. I just feel like there's more opportunities and more kind of freedom for people.
And with that same vein of opportunity and freedom, I'd love to talk to you about, your experience storyboarding and directing on areas, or sorry, not areas, but shows that have been kind of hailed as being really queer and great in its queerness. I'm specifically talking about Owl House,
for sure.
But I mean, Gravity Falls has its own queerness. I mean, Star in the Force versus the Force of Evil has its own queerness. Just start off our conversation. There's been slowly but surely, queerness has been pervading animation in just a really great way.
Absolutely.
I think my first question is how do you feel before we get into the logistics and the stories of, being a part of these stories that bring queerness to a forefront?
It's definitely something that I care a whole lot about. I think, LGBT representation in animation is probably one of kind of like the drums that I kind of bang on most frequently. I think there's been such a massive shift in the last few years, and hopefully I think we're just starting to see a shift. I feel like for a long, long time, people were kind of working behind the scenes, and you weren't necessarily seeing the results of that because like the amount of pressure the studios can put on artists is enormous. Like it doesn't really matter how hard you fight for representation if the studio can just say, cool, if you do that, we're just going to pull the episode. If you do that, we might remove you as a showrunner. Like the power imbalance is just so great, realistically speaking, that for a long time it didn't really matter how hard you tried, and it took a lot of work, especially from queer creators, like Rebecca Sugar, like Dana Terrace, who could straight up say, like, this is my direct identity. Like, don't censor me, but also, their support of their crews, often whom were very queer themselves, but also, like having, allies who are willing to really, fight for things like Alex Hirsch, really made a huge difference. I'm sorry, does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. I mean, if anything, it's talking about the next question I had as well of just, was there a situation of where you were the only queer person on the team? And it sounds like in most cases, or in Gravity Falls or Owl House, perhaps not, but it's the support of the allies that have helped in your experiences, especially in your experiences with unfortunately being censored by studios in what you're trying to create.
Yeah. I feel like my experience has been like slowly getting queerer with each team, if that makes sense. Like Owl House was like very, very openly tons of queer people. Star, I think, happened to have, like, kind of by chance, happened to gather a lot of queer people, I think, especially on kind of like the boarding teams. And then gradually, also kind of like going backwards in time, so like there's going to be less and less as you go farther back. Gravity Falls probably had like the least queer presence, partially just because of, again, at the time. Though I've never been the only queer person on a team. What I will say is that like I have been in a situation where like, I'm not the most extroverted person in the world. And I think especially like because I came out relatively later in life, I came out at age 22 as bisexual and then as trans basically yesterday. And so like I'm always a very kind of hesitant to kind of claim the identity because like I feel like I present more visibly queer now, but like I certainly didn't present super visibly queer, so I've always felt a little bit like, oh, like I don't want to take up space. I don't want to like claim an identity that I don't feel belongs to me fully, even though there's a whole discourse about that. So I've always been like a little bit hesitant to reach out to other queer people on the cast unless they self-identify and like are very clear, like this is something I super care about. And back when I was on Gravity Falls, people really weren't talking about queer representation. Like it really was just like, I certainly came into the industry and like I have a very vivid memory of like telling a friend before I broke in, and they were like, well, if I ever get a show, I want to make sure that my main character is going to be a gay man. And I was just like, that's stupid. No one will ever do that. They'll never let you do that. It's just kind of this assumption, like, why even bother? Like, it's not worth it. Like there's no possible good ending to this, which is, it's odd to think about now. That really was the impression that I got coming into the industry. And like, again, at CalArts didn't talk about it back in, early 2010s. It just wasn't a topic of conversation. So I know there were at least a couple other queer people on the team, but there wasn't kind of this open discourse of like, representation is something we should be all talking about and we should all be all fighting for. And again, that's something that's really changed rather nicely. And it's something that people are super open about now, which is awesome. But it wasn't always that way.
Yeah, for me at least, it seems new to me, which is really cool. But because I kind of grew up with it, it was like,
yeah,
this this is what it's always supposed to be like. And I think what needs to be acknowledged in every discussion about queerness in animation is that this is new. You know,
Yeah.
same as with, you know, women's rights, women's voting rights, it's relatively new when we think of the perspective, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's great to hear that, you know, so many queer voices are being appreciated and taking space within animation slowly but surely.
Yeah.
We talk about how studios are censoring identities. How have the conversations shifted now that studios are hiring so many queer voices?
I feel like there was like a major and sudden shift about 2 years ago, where it really felt like just kind of night and day, where it felt like, you know, suddenly everybody wanted queer voices after, you know, an eternity of no one wanting to talk about it, you know? And it was for me, I mean, yeah, that was just my impression. That's how I felt when I was the student I was at the time, which was Disney. And for me, it was truly night and day. It was just kind of like, what happened to the entire world order that I was used to? And it's strange to have been in a studio that, you know, was fighting you for so long that is now trying to be your ally. Like, I can't help but have like a little bit of just like, you need to acknowledge what you did before. And they're never going to acknowledge what they did before. Again, I have lawyer parents. I know that legally they can't acknowledge bad things that they've done before. So like, it's weird to have like all these experiences that I've had, which technically don't exist on paper, you know, it's very odd. So there was this kind of, it felt like this breaking point happened a couple of years ago. And I feel like in a way it's sort of coincided with kind of like the rise of corporate pride, you know? And this idea that is now like trendy to acknowledge Pride Month and to be, to have allyship and to support things in a very kind of like rainbowy, you know, always positive all the time kind of way. Yeah, and it's, you know, obviously there's so much discourse about corporate pride and whatnot. It's funny, it's odd to me because I grew up without that, you know. So I had this kind of naive like gut reaction of like, but it's nice that Wells Fargo has a rainbow flag, you know. And so like I simultaneously, like, it still feels novel to me that corporations would even acknowledge like queer people. At the same time, I can be frustrated when that corporate, very visible, very front-facing, you know, support is not always echoed, or is echoed in a much more hesitant way when it comes to money-making decisions, you know?
Yeah. I mean, my Instagram feed is colored with, hey guys, this company has this really great rainbow logo, but they've also donated some really awful things that have affected the LGBTQIA community negatively and also life-threateningly, which is crazy, the dichotomy.
I've seen those charts too. They're actually super helpful, to be honest. It really kind of illustrates the issue, because again, I have a little bit of a gut reaction of like, it's just nice that they have the flag. It's nice, but like to acknowledge it, like, no, it's where they're spending their money. That's what really, really matters. And like, even, you know, compared to, you know, things that actively hurt and harm real life queer people, representation isn't as important. You know, I'll just be honest about it. Like, it's real people are more important than fictional people, obviously. But like, I've definitely seen experiences of, say, you know, a company, you know, releasing their new line of Pride merch the same day that they, you know, functionally silence a creator from including a queer person in a book they're publishing, you know? So this stuff really does happen right on top of each other. And corporations are frustrating.
And you've worked with corporations more closely than I think. I mean, our audience is entry level as well as college level. So this is also insights on, you know, what kind of conversations are happening, what you see on social media in marketing versus what they're doing in the decision-making rooms. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. And I think it can be hard when you're an employee working at one of these companies, and you're really trying your best to make a difference. And sometimes it can feel like the fan conversation kind of treats everyone working at the company like a hive mind, As if, oh, it's Disney making all these pandering decisions. Oh, it's, the company is the one making the creative decisions. When really it's like this, there's this internal battle between creative and studio and also marketing and publicity and all this, like this huge just machine that's going on. But also that stuff is intentionally hidden from the public. So like, you can't blame people for not knowing,
Do you think the addition of social media is part of this wave that we've been seeing in it to push for diversity? I'm specifically referencing Q-Force, which came out. I did not watch it, but I do know that there's discourse on Twitter of just like all the creators were coming out saying the trailer was not what the product is. Please please give it a chance. The trailer was cut in a way that like doesn't show the character and the time and love we put into this. And of course they acknowledge like there are issues, of course, but please don't take the trailer and dismiss it, right? Like it was trending for those reasons of, Latinx people were it was trending because Latinx people were like, this is not representation, right? So do you think Twitter, Instagram, ways for creators to communicate and advocate for their voices after going through, the relationship they have with their studio is helping like the stories to be seen in a different way and demystifying, if you will?
Yeah, I mean, like I definitely was. I was following that drama a little bit. And I think I don't actually know anyone who worked on the show, but my gut instinct is to come down in favor of the creators and to assume that it was like a really badly cut trailer. Because like I've definitely been on shows where the publicity department is on its whole other situation. And we often have absolutely no control as to how our shows are portrayed, which is so unfortunate because like, the reaction and the discourse about a trailer is where I actually don't watch trailers. I don't like engaging with that discourse, but I have to acknowledge it can have a huge impact on how people perceive a work. And it sucks that oftentimes we just have absolutely no control over it. And also I think what's tough is that like, social media kind of puts everybody in these little micro bubbles, right? So like, within the very specific space of like animation, queer folks, I feel like we can get the message out of like, please watch this show, don't trust that trailer. But the intended audience for the show is much, much wider than that. Like I was just seeing, I'm part of this non-binary Facebook group, which is the most drama I've ever seen in a Facebook group ever. It's nothing but discourse. But just like, it can be frustrating because like I'm used to my little animation career bubble where you understand that like, hey, don't trust trailers. Hey, studios and creators are not the same. And to just kind of trust, to kind of give people a second chance, even if your first reaction to be like, whoa, I don't know about that. To go to like a pure, not animation focused, non-binary group and people are just fucking tearing that shit apart. And I'm just like, oh my God, guys, don't take everything at face value. Don't assume that just because the characters on screen look a certain way that the creators are also a certain way. And it's just like, it's hard to get that nuance out to wider communities. Unfortunately, we need to hit wider communities for a show to be successful, So, sorry, I'm not even sure if that had anything to do with the question, but it's like, this show is stressing me out.
I mean, this is the fun part about moderating, or I suppose in my mode, my first time experience of just like, this is a fun conversation of just queerness in animation has so many threads to follow. I mean, from the relationship between the creator and the studio to how social media and actually the audience are playing a role, because there is the concept of supply and demand, right? More people, or there are more safe spaces for queer people, not only in the industry, but are the audiences that the studio wants to hit. So we do have those moments of like queer baiting, or those moments of, queer baiting, and also just being kind of inauthentic with their queerness of, who are the writers, etc., who are having this character. But I think it's a conversation of like, there are three people or three groups in this, and probably more, and it just is like, how are they communicating, which is very interesting. But I do want to, I think the hard hitter of this conversation is specifically because of our work right now, is the conversation that you have with studios. You know, you were talking about how allyship is so important. How can you breach that discussion with the allies? You know, how can you have a constructive conversation with your allies as well as the studio? You know, I understand this is money grabbing, but this is also like, don't censor me, etc. How are those conversations done? How are they breached?
Yeah, I mean, I think it kind of depends on the overall vibe of the particular production you're on. I mean, ultimately, the showrunner kind of sets the tone for the atmosphere of a crew. You know, is this a place where people feel comfortable, you know, talking about personal issues? Is this a place where people feel comfortable bringing up, you know, concerns that might be a little bit sensitive? Or is this a place where people really don't feel safe? So hopefully you're in an environment that telegraphs to the crew that like, this is a queer friendly space. Like this is a space where you can, you know, really bring passion to your episodes, to the stories, and that invites people to really kind of like, you know, to contribute and to really get invested in the story in a healthy way. And, you know, ideally, if everyone's kind of passionate about the project, then it'll just be natural to kind of bring up, you know, like, oh yeah, I'm really excited about this character. I feel like, you know, this could be really a chance for me to represent my identity. And I mean, again, hopefully, if it's a good environment, by the time you bring that, you can already trust that there are going to be people who are going to be down for that nowadays. And like, again, honestly, just like the overall shift in conversation, at least for the crews that I've been on, have been that like, it's not even something I would question, that like I would feel safe to bring up these topics. You know, certainly on Owl House and Star, like there was already just such a comfort with, you know, discussing these issues in general, that when they came up in, you know, an important conversation, I already kind of felt comfortable discussing them with my crew, you know. I guess like how to create that environment, just hire, I mean, I feel like if you hire enough queer people, it'll kind of force the straights to just play along, you know.
That's the goal. Hire more queer.
Hire more. And it is kind of more of like a hiring decision, you know, like if you hire people who are down and reasonably, you know, aware of all this stuff, and you don't have to go through the process, like, you know, educating them or to explain to them why this is important, then you've already got allies built in, you know. And it's kind of like, it's a lot to ask someone to try and get someone to care about queer issues when they don't already, you know. So I guess I've been kind of spoiled that, like, certainly, like, especially Star and Owl House, it was already a given that like, we want this and this is an important thing to fight for, you know. I wish I had a better answer for like how to create this atmosphere. I've kind of happened to stumble into them, you know.
Do you have perhaps any advice on people who are just entering and they're not entering in necessarily safe spaces? Do you have any advice on how they can start a conversation with at least one person, or, you know, whether it's not necessarily, whether it's been in your experience in specifically animation or in your personal life, how do you reach a conversation of like, of please don't censor me, of, you know, this is who I am, this is what I care about, and as an equal member of whatever group, please, you know, hear me out, if that question makes
No, totally. I mean, I feel like I want to preface this with just like, you know, there are just some work environments realistically that are on the more toxic end of things. There are work environments, I mean, I don't want to sound ageist, but it's going to be tougher if you're working with a much older, and realistically, if it's an older crew, it's probably also going to be like a whiter male crew. If it's a less diverse, older crew in general, unless they're super chill, it's going to be tougher. And I feel like I don't want to put expectations on younger, especially people just entering the industry, who are in by nature more vulnerable positions, to have to put themselves out there and potentially be read as difficult, you know, in a crew. Hopefully you have at least one other person on the crew who is, you know, if you're in a shit crew that is dissatisfied and that wants to stir some shit up. So it really is a little bit of a case-by-case basis. Again, to me, I've been quite fortunate that I haven't had to fight that hard for it. I think the closest I had was, you know, working with Alex Hirsch. It hadn't occurred to him to include queer characters in his stories. I think when I first brought it up, not that I want to, you know, claim ownership of, you know, what would eventually become, but on the episode The Love God, that was an episode of, you know, nothing but romance. And my backstory for that is that, like, I had actually been put almost exclusively on romance-based stories in Gravity Falls. And I actually don't like writing romance, so I was bored. So I was just like, let's just shake this up somehow. Can we have at least, you know, 2 of the characters in this diner full of horny people be like cute old lesbians? And so I think how I got that ball rolling was I literally just, like, I emailed Alex after the launch meeting to be like, hey, I just had this idea. Could, you know, we have some queer people in here? And, you know, generally speaking, he was like a chill boss to work for, even if he wasn't necessarily thinking about queer issues kind of like top of mind at the time. And I kind of approached it with the kind of like, you know, like, hey, you're chill, right? You should be chill with this. And he was pretty open about it and like open to the idea from day one. I feel like it never hurts to kind of start from a place of like, you know, hey, I assume we're both chill liberal people, you know, who, you know, of course I assume that you're a nice straight white guy who wants nothing but the best for everybody. So how about this thing? You know, kind of approach it with the assumption that they're going to be chill, you know, and sometimes that'll kind of like prompt people to be like, yeah, I am chill. I am cool. But again, that's assuming that they're reasonably chill. I have no doubt there are certain showrunners who would, you know, make an issue out of it, you know, raise a stink. So definitely always, you know, trust your instincts first. As someone entering the industry, your first priority really, you know, there's nothing wrong with, you know, just trying to get your foot in the door and establish yourself a little bit first and make sure you feel safe and comfortable in your job before, you know, kind of reaching out and trying to advocate for others' behalf, because, you know, you always got to put on your own safety mask before, you know, assisting others.
Absolutely. That does bring an interesting topic in mind of just, when is it okay for someone who is entry level to leave a job that is toxic, whether they're discriminating against your gender, your sexuality, but it's still like this amazing opportunity where it's like the name will get you everywhere, but you don't want to leave right away because the name was so good and the experience wasn't. So what is your advice on, you know, leaving something that just is toxic?
Yeah, I'm actually not sure I have the best advice for this, because again, I've been quite fortunate with the crews that I've been on. I have never had to leave a crew for that reason. It always kind of helps to have like a support network of people who are kind of like at the same level as you, who can kind of just like be their kind of support system and can guide you. I find it very, very helpful. I definitely have like a crew left over from when I was a star. I had like a really, really close friend group there. And we can always be like, you know, hey guys, I'm having this experience at work. Is this me, or is this a fucked up work situation? And they can kind of really help you kind of get a read on, you know, is it really toxic, or is it something you can work with and kind of help you gain confidence in your decision? So I feel like it's really helpful to have a peer group. And again, it is a very individual situation, because like, you know, someone who, you know, isn't necessarily dealing with a whole bunch of who isn't dealing with a bunch of student loans is going to have a very different calculus than someone who is, you know, dealing with all, you know, student loans, you know, breathing down their necks and, you know, really can't afford to be without a job. So I can't really speak for everybody. I will say that there is no shame in leaving a toxic work situation. But, you know, everyone's kind of mileage may vary, and like, just, you know, acknowledge that like people's situations are different and like they all have to make different choices for different reasons. There's a very, very broad answer.
No, absolutely. I mean, that question was definitely not on our answers or questions we sent. So I'm really thankful for you rolling with the punches that I'm sending, because I mean, I just really enjoy hearing your past as well as your current. And I mean, like we said earlier in the call, of just experiences can be transferable, experiences we can all learn from. And I really appreciate you answering these really weird questions that I am now asking,
totally sensible.
even though the topic is queerness in animation. I feel like, again, queerness has so many threads that can connect to so many different things.
For sure.
So I really am appreciative of you just rolling with it.
No, and I think like it's important to acknowledge that like another thing that I think fans don't necessarily see is there's like a representation on screen, and then there's a work environment within the crew that you're working in, you know? And I think traditionally a lot of queer people have prioritized, you know, like, yes, I'm not going to get representation on screen, I'm not going to see my stories reflected, but I feel safe in this work environment. I feel supported just on an interpersonal basis. And, you know, it's good money for me and my family. And I think it's important to acknowledge, like, some people make that choice and they're just kind of like, I'm not going to engage with the story side. I just need to focus on me and my personal life, and the job is just a job. And that's a totally valid choice.
And I think that's a healthy distinction as well. I think capitalism has romanticized the work as being our life, which means it has to have so and so aspects. But I also think there is a second vein of, you know, you can love what you do, and just the current space in which we can do it hasn't caught up to what a lot of people are doing on their own time, which does go to a question that I sent before. So how can we as entry level or college level students continue the evolution of queer representation within our own projects, our own mini projects, if you will, like our shorts or our scripts that we're making with our friends?
Yeah, I mean, like, you've kind of hit the nail on the head there. I mean, like, it is, you know, because you have so much more freedom in your own work, I would definitely recommend, you know, just like being as fully indulgent as you possibly can with what you really, really want to see on screen. Put that in your samples, put that in your personal work. I will say, number one, you know, like, I've been in positions occasionally of, you know, seeking out, you know, people to hire for freelance for development projects. And it absolutely does make a difference if I see people like, okay, like I absolutely would look for someone who is presenting queerness from an authentic place. And if I see that in their portfolio, I'm like, okay, great. You're someone who really brings that skills and who's passionate about that. And I can see that in your work. That's actually an asset for when I'm hiring, you know, like, that's actually something that can really work in your favor and can attract people who are hiring, who value that sort of thing. And it kind of helps to telegraph, you know, like, this is what I'm passionate about. This is what I really care about. I think when I was coming up, it was more this mentality of, you know, kind of pander to the studios, pander what the studios want. Especially with streaming nowadays, we have no idea what the studios want. Things are changing so quickly. So I really recommend that people, you know, put their cringe right front and center, you know, show us exactly what you're passionate about, while showcasing, you know, technical skills, while showcasing and like that level of polish. But definitely in terms of like subject matter, in terms of, you know, how far you want to indulge like the fun, silly stuff, definitely go all the way.
Nice. I do know that there are a lot of YouTube productions coming out. I mean, YouTube is now like a form for these shorts and for these animated series.
For sure.
Do you, in your experience, you've gone to studios, you've been in those crews, would you consider working on, you know, those smaller productions that end up making it big on YouTube? And do you think for entry level, that is a place that they should feel comfortable going into?
I can't speak too much about those new independent studios because I've been pretty coddled for my career. I've been at, you know, the big at Disney and now at Netflix, which, you know, I won't, you know, lie. They pay real nice and they have really good benefits. And it would be, you know, a lot to give that up. I feel like I am at a point in a career where I have, I've saved up money having worked at these big studios for long enough that I think if a really good project came along, and especially sometimes it happens where like there's dry spells in the industry where like, nope, the major studios just aren't doing anything you care about and you just feel a little bit bummed out. I would take a pay cut to work on something that I care a whole lot about. I'm not gonna lie, I would have apprehension going to like a very small, very, very new studio. Again, because it's not just what's on screen, it's also the politics that runs behind it. It's really, really hard to run studios. These are really, really difficult to set up. And even if I'm not as passionate about the projects at Disney, like they have a super set infrastructure and, you're going to be taking the heck care of it there. And, I would say like there are a lot of horror stories from smaller studios, which I will not name, that can be incredibly toxic because there's no oversight, because they're so small. They don't really have HR. So I would definitely, I would be cautious. I would not assume that it is great or that it is terrible. But like there are places that seem to have very good reputations. My impression of, I think, a VZ Pop studio, I want to say, is like she seems to be known for paying, guild rates for all her, despite, being independently funded, kind of goes out of her way to make sure that people are well paid for their work. And I think that's really admirable. But I think, it's a case by case basis. I would be cautious, but, I would say never say never.
Well, really quickly, I know I said I wanted to talk about your writing because they are at Netflix, which is so cool. But really quickly, I want to check in with Monzi, who is moderating our chat. Monzi, are there any questions that people have been sending in? I've been slowly checking the bar, but if not, we can continue talking about this amazing opportunity at Netflix, or what I assume an amazing opportunity.
Yes, of course. You can continue. We've got some questions, but we can ask those later.
Okay.
Well, really quickly then, what can you share about your Netflix project?
Not a lot. That's the fun part of development. You can't tell anybody about it ever. Also, it's my second stint in development. So I've spent now a good couple of years of my career not being able to talk about anything that I've done, which is, it's stressful. Not stressful. It can be a bummer. Development is really fun, but it's also just like the black box aspect is definitely frustrating. Mm-hmm. What can I talk about? I guess I can say that I am on, I think, like a relatively uncommon deal at Netflix, where I'm developing two projects simultaneously. One is an original project and the other is based off an IP that Netflix optioned. That's also, both of those things are relatively common. So that's my project, and I am pretty much more or less developing it by myself. I am bringing in co-writers to do the pilot scripts, but aside from that, it's just me at home writing so many Bibles. So yeah.
Oh, that is its own hell, writing just Bible after Bible.
Oh my God. Yeah.
But an audience question. How did your opportunity to direct come about?
Right. So that came about, honestly, that was basically Darren's doing. Darren Nefsey was a showrunner of Star Wars Forces of Evil. And one thing that she did, which I really liked, is that she really prioritized giving people opportunities to move up within the crew. So, like board artists would get the opportunities, write an outline for an episode, or, in my case, I got the opportunity to kind of to test direct one of the episodes that I was boarding. And then when a slot opened for directing in season 4, I was able to move up, having kind of proven myself through that test episode. So, I mean, that takes a good amount of planning, especially because Star Wars is a very kind of strictly regimented schedule of a show, to kind of like move things around, to shuffle around the schedule, allow people time to do other things like that. So it was really cool that she prioritized that.
I mean, that is a great opportunity in and of itself. I mean, I think that's the dream of having growth in your future.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So another audience question is, what do you recommend people trying to break in without an animation degree?
I'm not sure how much I can answer that because I do have an animation degree.
Well, then
Let's
I have
see.
a
Oh,
follow-up.
okay. Yeah, cool.
When you, I mean, there's obviously the conversation of whether an animation degree is worth it. And I'm sure this person is also now thinking,
yeah.
like, oh, I don't have it. But now it's like, there are ways to get into the animation arena that I'm sure that you use as a practice, or just a different avenue of exploration of your art. So my follow-up question, rather than what do you recommend for people trying to break in without an animation degree, is what are tools or resources that you have used to hone your skills? Because in my eyes, I think what would be really a good way to break in is to showcase that you have talent,
For sure. And actually, I think as you were speaking, I realized that I actually have an answer for that question, for the original question.
I'm glad my rambling is
I volunteer for Rise Up Animation. So I have these like borderline kind of like rote answers that I can kind of just like, you could just like summon off the top of my head. So this is kind of like a multi-part answer. One is that technically you don't need a degree at all for animation. So there's like some people who are like having a point, they're like howling. I don't know what's going on. Sorry. I hope you're not hearing that. But anyway, so point number one is that you do not need an animation degree to get into animation. The degree itself is literally just a piece of paper. It serves no purpose. No one will ever check your resume. What you want to do is to simulate the specific opportunities that you would get at a good animation school. I will generally recommend either go to like a school with a really strong program like CalArts, Ringling, Sheridan, and there are a smattering of strong programs throughout the country, but I recommend either doing a program with a strong program or nothing at all, because our school is very, very expensive, and there unfortunately are a lot of schools that want to offer a degree but don't really have the ability. So definitely, check the student work, make sure that's up to par, make sure that people are getting placed out of that school, that there are actually people getting jobs out of that school before you sign away quite a bit of tuition money if possible. But the main things that you get at a top school like CalArts is the networking and the specialized classes taught by industry professionals. And right now there are a lot of online classes that are being taught by professionals, because realistically, a lot of places in the country or outside the country, you may not have access to people who work in the industry, but there are online classes that are options. If you're in the Los Angeles area, like CD, the Concept Design Academy is kind of a classic space for like really high level classes. And for networking, you do have to kind of force yourself to be a tiny bit of an extrovert in some ways. And there's kind of like two levels to that. There's the peer-to-peer networking, where you're kind of seeking out people who are at your level and maybe a teensy bit higher, where that point is to really kind of find allies, people who can kind of network with and be a support group, who will also let you know if there are opportunities that are appropriate to your level when they come about. And seeking out, mentors who are within the industry. This can be a little bit tougher, I think, if you happen to be, BIPOC, then you can, apply to Rise Up Animation. There are a couple of programs that will kind of match you with a mentor. But that can be a tricky process because, like, realistically, pretty much all animation professionals get quite a few requests to do mentorship, and it can be quite a bit of emotional labor to put that work in. So it's generally something I would start to seek out when you feel you're at a level where you have like a decent portfolio, kind of ready and kind of looking to get the next step, and to like kind of take you to that next step where you're ready to get that next job. That's kind of a good time to seek out mentorship. Because at a certain point, if you're early enough that your portfolio needs a lot of work, or if you don't have a portfolio ready at all, a mentor is just not going to be very helpful for you. They're not going to be able to give you that much information, aside from just, keep working at it. But yeah, those are the two levels of networking you want to do, plus getting those classes. And aside from that, technically the only thing you ever need to have to apply to animation is a portfolio. That is 100% where your effort should be going. Yeah.
What do you recommend in platforms in sharing your portfolio? For example, I know my job works closely with ArtStation.
For sure. ArtStation totally works. I think that's a little bit more meant for kind of like biz dev as opposed to storyboarding. Just find any site that is kind of unobtrusive and clearly displays your work in a way for recruiters that they can flip through really, really easily. I definitely wouldn't spend money on it unless you, for some reason, really want to. They're not looking for anything fancy. The format should just be very utilitarian, ultimately. I wouldn't spend too much time doing a fancy layout, just make a functional layout.
They always, so in my own research, portfolios are a great way to demonstrate your skill, but it's a very broad, show us your best work. Understanding that, you know, your portfolio is being flipped through so quickly.
Yeah.
What do you recommend being like the first 3 boards? And what do those first 3 boards demonstrate?
This is a big subject. It's like half of what I talk about usually through like mentors. For boarding portfolios specifically, my broad kind of guidelines are 2 to 3 strong sequences with a clear beginning, middle, and end that fit relatively cleanly into that, like that demonstrate kind of like the kind of benchmarks of a certain genre. And typically those genres kind of like comedy, where you want to highlight character acting and clear, simple staging. And always a focus on physical comedy. You never, in any portfolio, you don't want to have too much dialogue. You don't want to have a very dialogue based. You want to make sure it's very visual, very action or physical acting focused. Or an action board, which is going to be really heavy on kind of like dynamic camera angles, really dynamic posing, usually a little bit more focus on, oftentimes a little bit more realistic anatomy because you're going to be tackling more complicated perspectives. And yes, a more focus on dynamism overall. And there's kind of like a middle, there's a little bit of space for like dramatic things. That's typically a bit more of a feature space, where it can be like heavy focus on realistic character acting in that space, and kind of like really selling those emotions, without getting, again, too dialogue driven, because that's a huge pitfall for people. So yeah.
Well, great. As someone who doesn't normally storyboard, that was really intriguing. And I hope the people who do storyboard are, what distinguishes writing for animation from live action?
Well, I've never written for live action, so I don't entirely know. I think definitely, I would say definitely animation has to be much more visual. I think if an animation person is kind of reading a script from someone who comes up live action, kind of the thing people will look out for is like, are people just chatting? You know, are you conveying your story visually enough? To me, that's kind of like the classic hallmark that you want to look out for. Shoot, I'm like, what are the pitfalls?
In my experience, just writing, like, I mean, I write scripts versus storyboards, and for everyone out there, Sabrina comes from the storyboard side of scripting. On the scripting side, definitely descriptions are a must, you know, accurately conveying to storyboard artists and the rest of the people on the animation pipeline what you need without confusing or taking up too many lines is incredibly important, because you want to accurately show a picture. You want to show what's happening, because a lot of studios are asking the why animation question, which is very valid. But as an animation lover, I'm like, make everything animation. I love it. So it's being able to accurately but concisely describe what your characters are doing, what the scene is, and in addition to that, understanding that the pipeline for scripts is not like the pipeline for live action. For example, you can have a scriptwriter on set and they can rewrite it in a jiffy and it'll be fine. Versus, you know, writing for animation, there isn't that necessarily that flexibility of someone being on set and rewriting, you know, like once it's gone to a specific area of the animation pipeline, it's like you can't really change the dialogue very easily. And I think those are just some of the ways animation writing is different from live action writing.
I would also say that just like the interface between board artists and writers is, I assume, is pretty unique to animation. I personally consider functionally board artists to be writers in their own right, especially if you're working on a board-driven show. But people who are trained in film language, in film storytelling, I feel like it really behooves a writer to be open to that collaboration, and to acknowledge that like the boarders are going to come in with their own ideas to how to plus a story, or who may come in with critiques and be like, this isn't working, or that this arc isn't tracking as well. And so I think the script is really finalized through the boarding process. I've definitely been on episodes where the script, the showrunner thought the script was fine, suddenly gets to rough boards and is like, oh shit, we got to start over. So the boarding process really brings that script to life, and like that is where the script kind of lives, and that's where you can kind of expect a lot of rewrites kind of in that space. So yeah.
I mean, I would love to continue talking about this because your experience is just so interesting to hear. I mean, you really are part of this wave of queerness in animation. But it is unfortunately 8:01.
It is 8 o'clock, yes.
It is 8 o'clock. So I really want to wrap this up with one more question.
Sure.
What advice would you have for your younger self?
Lean into the cringe. I feel like especially this past year, quarantine has definitely helped. I think going through my first development project and into my second, I feel like the big thing, that the big revelation has just been like, fully indulge in the thing that you're embarrassed to write, because I've often found that like the thing where I'm just kind of like, oh my God, I can't write this. This is too embarrassing. This is too fucking fangirly nonsense. It's often things people end up reacting to the most strongly, and I feel like I used to be a lot more restrained in my writing until like 7 months ago. And now I just feel like, put your whole ass on the table. If people don't like your ass, then you can change it later. But just like be super honest. This is what I want. This is the cringe that I love. This is the garbage that I live in. Do you want it or not? And they might say no, and then you can kind of moderate and be like, okay, well, what garbage will you accept? But I've often been surprised how often they've like, when you just kind of own it, people will kind of work with it, and you can actually, be open about, what you care about, and really lead with your intentions very, very clear. So yeah, I would say lean into the cringe is definitely what I would say.
I love that. Well, thank you so much, Sabrina, for taking the last hour and so talking to me about queerness in animation, social media, studios, and leaning into the cringe.
Of course, thank you. This has been great.
To our AQIA listeners, thank you so much for attending this panel, Queerness in Animation. We understand that we have queer people in our audience and in our community, and we want to see you. We do see you as a part of the team behind AQIA. I would just like to say that the board has just been so amazing in listening to my ramblings and my own cringe. So please, queer members, BIPOC members, communicate with us. We want to hear from you. We want just to foster this community of this safety and continue this change within animation. And it starts with us. So lean into your cringe, continue to communicate with us within our Instagram, our LinkedIn, our newsletter, what have you. And we'll see you next time.
Bye.